The Owwll Podcast with my co-host, Jaime. What is up?
Producer Jaime.
Producer Jaime. Thank you, by the way, this week, I guess time flies.
Yeah.
I was actually co-hosting with you on a different podcast.
That was so much fun.
That sure was.
So much fun. And in fact, here's what I didn't tell you. So the morning that we recorded, I got a message from Glenn, my typical co-host for the Podfest podcast. And he says, hey, I have 3 shows today, but you still want to record this afternoon? I can. I said, oh, hold the phone. You had a brilliant idea about how to fill this gap while you're on your road trip, and I took you up on it, and I already asked Jason, so, sorry, not sorry. I wanted Jason.
Scared. He's getting scared. He's like, wait, Jason's doing the Owwll Podcast in Shark Tank. He's like, maybe this is a bad idea.
I'm slowly replacing you, Glenn.
For everybody listening, Jaime is the host of the Podfest podcast.
Yes.
Podfest is a huge event every year. They have about 2,000 attendees. Last time was in Orlando.
Yes.
The second largest conference every year with Podfest.
Yes.
Podcasting.
And it's coming up in January again in Orlando, this time right next to SeaWorld. So, you know, we a lot of podcasters make it a family affair because it is in Orlando, and it can't be any easier because you're right next to SeaWorld. So bring the family, get your tickets, podfestexpo.com. It is my mecca. So if you're into podcasting or thinking about it, you have to be there.
So, Jaime, tell the audience, what is this podcast all about, the Owwll Podcast?
So this podcast, the Owwll Podcast, obviously is, presented by the Owwll App, where you can monetize your expertise. And what we do on this show is we help people develop their expertise. How do you connect? How do you learn? And how do you grow with those around you in order to get those goals that you're trying to attain? And then, of course, how do you pay it back, right? Pay it forward and pay it back. So I'm so excited about this show. It's going to be really helpful for people who are trying of all kinds of journeys to try to get to that next level, because the people, our guests, are at that next level. They're experts right here on the Owwll App. So you can find all of our guests right in the palm of your hand on the Owwll App. And that's what we're going to be doing on this show, is asking our guests, like our wonderful guests today, to talk about their expertise so you can take those tips and tools and run with them.
Yeah, and what's cool now with the Owwll platform, we could just literally dive into the platform, see who has the most calls, the most reviews, right? And the person sitting to my left, Will Kesselman, literally has
the pack.
He is leading the pack. He has 200 approximate reviews on there, and all 5-star, which I've never seen.
Amazing.
Right? So people love this man to my left.
Yes.
And, he's going to go into detail about his expertise today, and we're excited because it's not only happening on the platform, of course. Mm-hmm. A lot of these folks on the platform then call Will and want to do a one-on-one on Zoom, and that's what it's all about.
Yes.
It's helping individuals, right, make the right decisions, and even other businesses, right?
Yes.
Like you, like me, we pick up, like, Will, what are you doing for your business?
Right.
Because at the end of the day, we're all experts in something.
Right.
And we need to learn from one another.
And here's why I'm excited that Will's here. Because I want to make sure that as much as this platform and this podcast can serve people who are doing kind of traditional entrepreneurial ventures or corporate ventures, that's not all that there is. There's so many different labels that can be applied to someone who's an expert. So I'm really excited to welcome you, Will, because you are a consultant. You're into coaching, human behavior, 14 years experience as a special victims investigator. You have helped, this is incredible. You have helped guide over 1,000 people to safety. That's powerful. So you have become an expert on transformational coaching, and you've survived your own trauma, and that's what's gotten you here. So let's start with that first segment, all about you and your background and everything.
Hoot, hoot, all about you.
Yes. And so if you don't mind, I won't mind starting this off, because I'm fascinated of how people become experts. Sometimes you think, I want to be this, and so you take those steps to be that. And sometimes you're brought in somewhat involuntarily into becoming an expert. And I feel like that might be your story. So I'd love to hear your background and how this became your passion and what you decided to become an expert in.
First of all, thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it. And yeah, my journey is a little bit unique in that sense. I was in a grad school, and at one point I'm like, okay, what should I do afterwards, and so on and so forth. And so the initial thought was, okay, so I'll do the investigations for 2 or 3 years, get some, proper assessment skills, and then go probably do a PhD in forensic psychology or IO psych or whatever. it's now 15 years later. And actually, in July was the 15th year. So 15 years later,
Wow.
I'm still an investigator doing special victims investigations, the heavy of the heavy stuff, like or more intense than you see on TV. And we work hand in hand with the detective squad, who is the special victims detectives, and others. So that's pretty cool in and of itself. And on top of that, it's just one thing led to another where I was seeing the impact. I was seeing how I was able to help and how others weren't necessarily getting certain pieces. And when you, in my case, when you begin to see impact, you're like, this is cool, I want to stay. This is cool, I want to do more. And as time went on, I was being handpicked for elite divisions or elite units or elite assignments, to the point where now I work only nights and weekends, emergency cases only, since 2017. And it's rewarding. It's challenging, of course. A lot of safety concerns and so on and so forth. I'm not going to lie. I'm lucky to still be alive, to be honest, in terms of close calls. And that's a whole other story.
Do you mind sharing an example of one example, just to kind of really solidify it for people what you've done? Yeah.
Yeah. So my division is different than the NYPD or other criminal law enforcement divisions. At best, we go in pairs. At worst, we go in alone. Into buildings, sometimes almost always unarmed. And there's no walkie-talkie, there's no shield, there's no vest, there's nothing. It's yourself and whatever you believe in. If you believe in something. And if you're an atheist, then that's fine too. But, bottom line is it's literally yourself, whatever skills you have, whatever sort of pre-planned stuff you have in your head and so on and so forth, and you walk in. And there are times where I've had colleagues be attacked or whatever in stairwells or going up to where they have to go or whatever the case is. And again, you're often alone. In my division, we're usually in pairs overnight anyway, often, but not always. So there's that. But at the same time, there's a lot that goes on that people don't know about. That doesn't make the newspapers. That doesn't make the headlines and stuff. You hear a lot about, a cop doing something wrong, or whoever doing something wrong, or a child dying, God forbid, or something going wrong, or a shooting, or who knows what, or, police brutality, but you don't really hear about in terms of what I do. So to be very specific, because people have asked a lot about this. So I work for officially a division of child welfare. Now, some people say, okay, so you're just a social worker. Not entirely, okay? So what we do in my division, especially, it's pure investigations. We don't do counseling. We don't do that kind of stuff. In fact...
So you work hand in hand with social workers, I would imagine.
So we're upstream. So it then goes to the social worker itself, who's in the field office.
Gotcha.
Or it goes to an investigator in the field office, who then hands it off to a social worker if it has to go that way, or there's referrals made or whatever. But in New York, it's so unique in that we're not just doing neglect or school issues or not going to school or, educational neglect or that kind of stuff, or, some of the other stuff in terms of, a whole bunch of stuff. But it really gets much more intense. That it's slightly similar to a CPI in certain parts of Florida, the Palm Beach area, actually, as one example. And it's also slightly similar to some investigators in California, but not many. And because I'm actually famous, so to speak, within the circles that I'm in, of having what I call Where's Waldo cases. So most of my cases spanned all over the country and internationally. And so I got to learn a lot about the laws. That's the term I use. I
haven't heard Where's Waldo in so long. It's just like a memory popped up in my
Yeah,
head.
no kidding.
I'm like a little child. Like, there he
Searching
is.
for hours.
Yeah. I have the Bible Where's Waldo book. I like that.
So it's cool. But so bottom line is, I've worked with lawyers in different states. I've worked with investigators in different states, and I sort of know a bit about what is and isn't done in all these different states. And of course, there's the state stuff and there's the county stuff. And case law by county is a whole other animal. And I've had a tremendous education in that sense through my professional experiences. And then there's my personal experience. So getting to this point to answer your question, where, you asked in terms of how do I get to a point where I'm now a hybrid coach consultant, which is the service that I offer, with a deep understanding of government, which isn't really known. It's not public. It's not out there, which took me 4 years, by the way, to fight the government.
No one knows how the government runs. Except for you.
There's so many arms.
Yeah.
It's out of control.
Unless you're in it. And it's also about understanding how the police function in different places, how child welfare functions, how other pieces function.
So back it up
Sure.
1 second, because I personally am still kind of, you walk into, a room by yourself. Kind of explain what that means before we jump to the
That's
next
fine.
subject, because I want our audience to really understand, what exactly you're talking about. What are you walking into, and then what happens at that point afterwards?
Sure. So first of all, getting through a building to the door is a feat in of itself,
Yep.
which we're thankful for each and every time. And then we're listening to see what's behind that door first and foremost, honestly, because we don't know if there's yelling, there's screaming, if someone's who knows what. I don't want to be too graphic because, whatever.
Right.
Only people can only handle so much. And then we're also seeing what's up with the neighbors. If it's a completely silent hallway, then we know there's not much going on. Depending on how the case comes in, will usually, almost always, depends on certain other caveats, knock on neighbors' doors first for their safety. Because as we know, snitches get stitches.
That's interesting,
Okay.
yeah.
So this way we can talk to neighbors sometimes further down the hallway if there's a safety concern, or if there's an echo issue, or who knows what. And then we make sure the door is closed and they're done. We wait about 5 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever it is. Then we go to the home itself, as long as there's no safety concerns initially, right? And then we'll knock on the door, we'll make phone calls, we'll do what we have to do to try and get in, respectfully, legally, so on and so forth, just to make sure we're clear. Because we don't pull shenanigans. And we're usually successful more so than not with engaging. Now, obviously, people have the right to refuse in certain states more than others, and there's dynamics, and that's a whole other caveat, which I'm not going to go into. But long story short is that the door gets opened, and we're able to go inside with permission, and then we assess what's going on. And I try to first look at the house first, walk through. I ask if they can please escort me through the entire house, because I want to see what's in the house first. I don't want someone coming out of a closet with who knows what, or maybe it's the perpetrating domestic violence dad, or reverse, because there's more and more cases now, especially because of COVID, where the woman is narcissistic or manipulative or can grab a knife or who knows what. So, and it's important to be even keeled as well. And so either way, we want to know. It could also be teenagers and stuff. Like there's some teenagers who maybe they're involved in gangs or whatever, which, it's the reality of how things go, unfortunately. Or there's other things going on, or there's a friend over or whatever, and maybe they have a warrant or they have an issue. So it's all about safety first. So we go through that house first, make sure there's nothing blatant or crazy or whatever. We may have to go through the house a second time if certain things pop up, which matches with the investigation, like the notes that come in. So just like, for example...
And where are these notes coming in from, so I understand?
I was going to ask, like,
just gonna get there.
I was going to ask about, if people are seeking your, like, what kind of advice would you give to somebody who needs to get out of a situation that can get someone like you to come and be at the door when they need you? What is a safe step for someone to take? I mean, I know every situation can be different, but what might you be able to offer, whoever's listening?
So first, answer your question. So again, we're engaging the family, getting information and so on and so forth, right? And then we have to figure out what's the best scenario. Oftentimes, so we can dictate, we choose not to dictate to someone, you have to do this or you have to do that. It's much easier for people to see the information for what it is. We paint the picture and they come to their conclusions, right? So, which is like coaching, which they don't tell us we're coaching, but another story completely.
Yeah.
But that's part of the training. As a
helping
caveat.
guide people through a process is coaching. Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely, 100%.
So whether it's the mom and the kids, for example, they're either going to choose to stay or go. Oftentimes it can be to family, friends, or whatnot, especially if there's family or friends that the perpetrating individual, whether it's a same-sex couple or whatever, if the perpetrating individual does not know certain friends or family, we try and choose those people first, because then it's harder to trace, harder to find, harder to stalk, harder to do all those
They're
things.
less likely to show up at the door.
Yeah, and cause not just harm to that family, but harm to this, re-traumatizing this family, showing them that they're not safe anywhere. And that's not true. There are ways I've dealt with this is why I became a consultant, is because there's ways to handle it where, look, no one's perfect. People make mistakes and stuff, but I know I held myself to a very high standard. And when people ask me questions as a government agent or as a consultant, I give them the right information with proper success that I haven't seen in most places whether it's on the government side or whether it's on the personal side. And there are those who are successful on both sides of it, but in general, what I'm saying almost always works. There's always caveats. There's always, issues.
I almost got to think there's almost like too many cases, so the government can't handle everything.
Yeah.
Right?
So I don't want this to be a government bashing situation or whatever, because I have to be careful. I still have contracts and stuff, so I have.
But I don't think it's government bashing. I think it's just a realization of the resources and what the society is going through right now and how people are not getting along.
And the percentage of increase.
So Governor Cuomo, for example, and also I think it was the former mayor of New York, Bloomberg, both had said that we have to do more with less. Okay, so I can quote them, and in that context, answer your question. Where there are constraints. We are juggling. Whether if you're in the field office, it may be juggling caseloads or whatever, possibly. In my opinion, of course, it may be other aspects. So my division, we have X number of cases, and we work it. Yes, there's time constraints, and our supervisor or the managerial division can say, why are you going so slow? If we justify it properly, we're fine. If not, we're held to task as to why we're taking so long. I get into trouble more often than not, I'm not going to lie. Because for me, yes, I follow the guidelines for time and timeliness and not abusing resources, whatever. But ultimately, we're here to serve. And if we don't serve properly, I might be the only person who ever speaks to this family.
Yeah.
Not just ever again, but ever.
Yeah.
Because the perpetrator can create situations where there's now apps on the phones. There's now other situations where they can't call, they can't get help, they can't go to family. They can't even send a carrier pigeon with a note out to whoever. And I'm not being facetious, I'm being for real.
Yeah.
And then they're stuck in the situation, and we hear these other horror stories of, kids being in basements for 10, 20 years or whatever. And there are times when one CPS or one officer went to that home or interviewed that one person, whether it's school or whatever, and if they asked the right question with the right training, they were able to get something to go off of. Some for criminal probable cause, for us, other aspects, preponderance of evidence or so on and so forth. Depends if we're talking about court with what I do or investigations in the field with what I do. And then it's, okay, we have enough now. Let's now work with this.
So I want to dig into your expertise with one more question.
Go ahead.
So if there's anybody who's watching or listening who is interested in becoming doing what you do, what is one common misconception or stigma about domestic violence that you can address that helps them understand the reality of what you do?
So there's two parts to that question. One is the government part, and one is the consultant coaching part, right? So for the government part, it's helping the family in terms of their safety, whether they stay or they go in the house, shelters, or so on and so forth. For what I do as a coaching consultant is far more robust and detailed. I have far more tools in the chest that I can use, and I'm not restricted by the government rules and regs. So one thing they should do is not tell their abusive person whatever they're doing. Most people are like, I'll talk to him, I'll try and get him to change, or maybe he'll see a different perspective. And the irony is that also comes into play when someone is involved in a child welfare case or police are involved with domestic violence and it's a divorce situation, high conflict divorce, and they're like, oh, I'll just talk to the cop, the person who's being abused, the survivor, the victim. I'll just talk to the cop or I'll talk to the CPS. The problem is that there's a certain mindset that these professionals have, and they have them for a reason. I'm not knocking it. And so people think, okay, I'll appeal in a certain way, and they're not getting the right response. They're like, well, they were so cold, they were so whatever. It's because they're trained, they hear all this stuff, they're jaded by it. And so you can't appeal that way. It's, again, the magic, so to speak, of what I do, a few aspects, but one magical aspect of what I do is understanding not just the language, but words get responses. If I talk to you about
the
salad
compassion
dressing,
part,
there's compassion as well. Compassion is very important, but words get responses. So if I talk about salad dressing in the supermarket, that's one response. But if I talk to you about podcasting, I'm now, to you especially, I'm now an equal, right? And that's a different response completely. And we talk shop in that respect, and that's a whole different dynamic. That's the point. The right dynamic with the police or child welfare or the courts, or even to a judge with the right words, or even when your own lawyer, because lawyers don't do the preparation the right way, in my opinion. Okay? Some of them do, most of them don't. I don't know if it's ethics. There's a whole ethics aspect to it, which I respect. There's also the billing aspect where they can't always bill as much as they want to, because then they can, be perceived as overbilling, and a client will complain to the bar or whatever the case is. And so they just keep things moving and everything else. Whereas if they explain to their client, these are issues, not you do this or don't do this, but these are issues, be aware. This is what people don't understand is when it comes to divorce now, it's gotten so niched, so specific, so intense that you do need a coach. Okay, I don't care if it's me or somebody else. That's not an issue. Okay, but ultimately, people don't realize this. You do need an extra person guiding you who understands all these nuances so that they can give the lawyer the right tools. So the information speaks court, so they can empower themselves. Ultimately, whether it's domestic violence and a quote unquote more chill. I don't like using the word entirely, but let's use the word more chill for now. More chill kind of domestic violence where it's just verbal or it's just whatever. And forgive me for saying just, because I should know better in that respect. But the point is, things escalate. Things don't stay at X. It always gets higher, 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 higher over time. It could be increasing like exponentially over weeks. It could be increasing in a small amount, pluses, so to speak, over months, years, whatever. So
and the courts and the lawyers don't help with that because it takes
no,
longer
no.
and longer
That's
and longer. And you're like, I just want to get done with this.
And they're getting
That's right.
paid.
And everything's been delayed. And everything's been delayed.
And
Yeah.
that's exactly the thing. And I help reduce the legal fees, reduce the time in court. But more importantly, if I can't affect that because there's a judge that's causing havoc or whatever's going on, at the very least, I know, and I've had the numbers back me up statistically, being successful in how to verbally interact with a narcissistic person to get the right responses, to at least be able to breathe, to have control, to have your empowerment back and your sense of your voice back.
Yeah. You say something interesting. You're like, you're coaching people through divorce, essentially. And really, honestly, in every aspect of your life, it now takes a village, right, to raise each of us up. We have to go and turn to help from everybody else. And in terms of this show, I think we really are leaning on what do those relationships look like? Where do they come from? So I think that can bring us into our next segment.
And our segment is Hoot, do you know? But we got to play a quick
Hoot,
commercial
do you
break.
know?
We have to do a quick commercial break for one of our top Owl experts
Oh
on the
my
platform.
gosh,
So
yes.
go ahead.
Yes, so the Owwll app is great at connecting people, and one of our favorite people on the app is Mr. Daniel Hall. All right, here we go. What if I told you there's a way for you to see how much time your audience was taking out of their lives to engage in your content? Daniel Hall is the adoptive dad of 6 remarkable children who have made him an expert in listening with more than just his ears. And that has been his inspiration in creating Peekaboo. 3 years in the making, Peekaboo for LinkedIn is shifting creators' minds from vanity metrics to reality metrics. Learn more about your superfans and Peekaboo at staging.peekaboo.live. And if you would like to sponsor the Owwll podcast and get your brand in front of all of our up-and-coming experts, reach out to me, Jaime, Jaime, at flintstonemedia.com.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Owl Podcast, of course. So this is Who Do You Know, Will? So this is all about, how you're networking. Now that you're saying, hey, I'm working with New York, but now all of a sudden I want to work outside New York, right? A whole new world, comes around of entrepreneurship. Everyone wants to do side hustles today because, there's more passion, of course, with running your own business. We're seeing, LLC numbers skyrocket right now. EIN numbers skyrocket. And of course, everyone on the Owl platform, we're seeing a lot of people working 9 to 5 and then 6 o'clock on, they're on the Owl platform connecting and networking.
My old show was called Business in the Bedroom because those are the people that are building their business after hours in their bedroom.
It's time to bring it back.
There you go.
Is that show still going? Or?
It's now called Podcasting Your Brand.
Yes.
So you whatever. Go ahead.
Rebrand it back to the original. Okay, so let's start with, now that let's start there. Your other business, kind of go in detail. What is it? So our audience understands. And then how are you obviously picking up clients? Like, how do you network right now?
So the biggest thing for me is networking, because it's easier for me to network, and entrepreneurs and business people understand it's less of a sort of a educational climb. So what I do is so unique. It's very different. You have what's it called? You have lawyers who aren't practicing, who are coaches with divorce or advising or consulting. You have PIs or former law enforcement detectives, whatever, who also advise and stuff. And they don't always get it right, in my opinion, especially the PIs and the detectives and stuff in terms of domestic violence. But people think, oh, I'll go to the police or I'll go whatever. But people don't think about someone who truly knows the systems and works with all of the systems. Okay, part of the issue, and this is actually an unknown fact, there is a company based in either California or Arizona, I forget where, and their sole mission is to deal with the concerns of the toxic work environment in child welfare. That's their entire mission.
Really?
Yes, they all left child welfare from California, and I don't know if they're based in Arizona or California. It's one of the two, and it's a 15-person company. You can find them on LinkedIn, okay? And that's their entire mission, is to deal with the toxic information. Why? Not just the police and child welfare, but each agency says, well, don't say too much to each other agency. So then you don't have someone knowing all of it. But I'm a decent human being. I connect well with people, networking even back then, in terms of, government stuff, whatever, or even now too. And
You're a decent human being. It's up for debate.
The point is I'm able to get information from the police in terms of how they do their procedures, how they, do stuff. And through that, the right wording on a police report isn't just paperwork. It's a cop who then responds 5 years later, 10 years later, or a judge who reads it, and from the right words, you get, again, that right response I mentioned before. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, they're like, wait a second, who's really the victim here? Who's really the perpetrator here? And that's where things get really key. Really
I mean, not to be silly, but, a lot of the country was wrapped by the Johnny Depp and Amanda Heard's thing, and and how, who do you believe and stuff like that. So we all kind of witnessed a version of what you're talking about.
So that's actually an interesting case study. Okay, so there was one, I think it was a LMSW, a licensed master social worker, who was a therapist for that family who testified in court or responded. I forget where it was, but I saw it online on a reputable site, not some whatever. Okay,
not TMZ.
No, well, I don't want to mention names. You can mention if you wish. I don't want to mention
TikTok,
names.
not TikTok.
But bottom line is this one, and this is what my gut was, and they said it's mutual violence. People don't really know what mutual violence is. Mutual violence is when two people are doing violence against each other on an almost equal level. You don't really have like a meter who's more, who's less. It's really hard to figure it out.
There's no one sitting in the audience turning it.
However, with the Amber Heard case and the Johnny Depp case, what's really interesting is Amber Heard making certain comments towards the end of that case, which were belittling Johnny Depp in a status aspect, where in my opinion, and I'm not bashing women at all, but in my opinion, Amber Heard is likely, again, I'm not the fly on the wall, the paint on the wall, whatever.
Sure.
What happens behind closed doors is a whole other story.
Right. Lots of caveats,
Amber
dropping
Heard,
them all.
No,
Go ahead.
It's fair, though. It's very
it's
true.
true. It's true. Yeah.
Fair is fair.
Yeah.
It seems like Amber Heard is more of the aggressor than Johnny Depp. Now, they've both done crazy stuff, don't get me wrong, but it seems like Amber Heard is more of the aggressor than Johnny Depp, okay? And from that aspect, because again, when women are narcissists, again, female narcissists are give or take 2 to 3% of the population. There's no real stats on this, but that's a general idea from professionals I've spoken to. There aren't stats for men as narcissists.
I have a very close relationship with one, so I can say that they do exist.
Yeah. For men, it's about 4% of the population, give or take, and that's from actual studies.
So it seems to be overused though on the internet.
Yeah,
right
that's,
now.
that's a whole,
what's your opinion on
It
like?
drives me crazy.
So, yeah,
like,
what's the
like,
definition?
like there's like 20 items in, and then all of a sudden like every man, I'm like, yep, I hit that
I'm this,
one.
I'm that, I'm this.
that one. I'm like, am I a narcissist? Oh my crap! But it's like also medicine. Like you said, like, do I need that medicine? Yeah, we all go through that, but it just feel like, and there's some funny TikToks on that. There's some hilarious ones where like, because with everything going on.
This is very important. Yeah,
and it is because I feel like it's being overused.
Yeah.
We're like, well, my boss is a narcissist. It's like, not every boss is a narcissist.
So
they have to say that you're late and that's not okay, right? Like things like that.
Yeah, so that's a huge point. So
Yes.
I don't diagnose. Even if I had my licenses and I was whatever, I don't diagnose. And, people who actually have licenses, whether it's on, hold on one second, on, not Owwll, the other app, social.
The bad
doesn't
app.
matter.
The other bad
The
ones.
other-
Owl's the good one.
Yeah, there's only one app that matters.
Anyway.
Clubhouse.
Yeah. Sorry. Whether it's Clubhouse or others, the professionals are specifically saying they're not diagnosing, they're not whatever for a reason. Because A, you can't.
Right.
But even if you could, you still shouldn't.
Right.
And so when I use the word narcissist, it means narcissistic behaviors, or predominantly. Look, bottom line is everyone's narcissistic on some level. That's the honest truth, okay? And you do truthfully want someone who's slightly narcissistic or more so narcissistic if they're a brilliant surgeon, because you want to make sure they do the right thing to save someone's life, or they do the right thing as a drill, as a commander, or a very high up in the army, and they're able to make the right decisions and make tough decisions. That's what you need a narcissist for. I hate to say it, but that's the honest truth. Okay, and there are issues in the army about inappropriate behaviors and stuff. That's another conversation. But there's reasons why evolution, on an evolutionary basis, we've had narcissists, and that's why it continues and why it's there. But in terms of a family dynamic, it's bad news. And that's where, we're talking about. That's why I'm here and others exist. And so narcissist, for me, it's more about behaviors. It's controlling, manipulation. It's going as far as like putting, stalker apps or let's call it bugging the phone so you can track someone, which is like a whole nother can of worms, which should never happen ever. It should be a loving, respectful relationship. Just even friendships and stuff, roommates, who knows what. And so
Apple is a narcissist. They track us all. Companies are narcissists. No, I'm joking.
Some companies can be more intense with tracking or recording or whatever, which is true.
Yeah.
Apple's actually one of the better ones, in my opinion, when it comes to privacy and so on and so forth. I won't mention other names, but we'll leave it at that. So,
Facebook.
But while we're talking about Owwll as well, Owwll does not record, and this is very important to say, because especially in my line of work and others, right, it doesn't get enough clout, because the more important stuff is you make money, and people want to make money, which is great. Don't get me wrong, you pay your bills, and feed yourself, or whatever. But
I'm not going to be bringing out the money gun on this interview. That's not really where we're at.
But more importantly, Owwll, you don't record, and so you can feel safe. I've had people call me, and they told me it's like a fake name, it was an Owwll or whatever, and that's fine. And they said, well, we don't want to tell you stuff. And as they're speaking in 5 minutes, and I go, okay, so this is the scenario. And they go, how did you figure this out? That's actually happened. The week I had 3 phone calls around the time when FAU was involved. I don't want to say too much, I'll be too specific, whatever, but around that time. And so someone called, asked me questions. I'm like, this is the scenario. And they're like, holy crap, how did you figure this out? I'm like, I know what I'm doing, man. I've been doing it long enough.
You're an expert.
The patterns are there. I appreciate that. But in terms of the narcissistic behaviors, the patterns are
Owwll
there.
expert.
It's okay. It's all right. I was right for the pickings. But, the patterns are there, and so you have to look at patterns and behaviors. And it's not just, like I mentioned before, about words, patterns and behaviors. Words in terms of the right responses, the right words, right responses, or speaking languages, so to speak. But it's the same thing when it comes to patterns in terms of, okay, well, this is the playbook for someone who's more narcissistic or has the behaviors, right? And this is how you counter it. And that's very, very important.
Yeah.
Very, very important.
Yeah. Has it been helpful as you've been growing in your expertise in your career, and now you have this venture that you've started? Are you tapping into those relationships that you've built over the years? Because you've mentioned you have to be kind of like, there's this agency, and this agency, and you have kind of like webs at all of them. Yeah. So are those relationships helping you throughout over the years and continuing to build and all of that?
A little bit. The more of the networking aspect of having the fortitude or the balls, whichever way we want to say it, okay, just to ask certain questions.
Huevos.
That's fine. To ask certain questions, to be outgoing, because I'm actually an introvert by nature. You wouldn't know this at all. People are like, you an introvert? I'm like, yes, by nature.
But you put a microphone in front of him.
And part of it is because of the trauma I had as a child that I experienced. Also the trauma when I was married to a narcissist, or someone who has narcissistic behaviors, I should say, to be very specific. And you learn from that in terms of the personal experience, but it was even more intense having it at home and at work, and it was like double compounded, PTSD and all that kind of stuff. But that's not for now. And you in general learn from that. And you see the patterns, you see all this information, you're like, bam, I can diagnose it or whatever. But to answer your point before about like, we're all narcissists or we're not, or everyone uses it like water in that sense. It's like, you go to a doctor and doctors say, well, yeah, you can diagnose yourself on WebMD for everything because, you can find whatever it is, and I match this, and I match this. And I have
Right.
all these different things.
And you're always about to die, no matter what it is.
Yeah,
Seconds away.
And it's not just a commercial, a pharmaceutical commercial saying,
Yeah.
these are your risks. It's WebMD saying these are your risks. No, but more importantly, networking is key, because when someone, especially in my field, understands, and my field includes therapists, mental health professionals, it includes former police, it includes PIs, it includes lawyers. Although lawyers are tough to crack because they're like, well, you're really nothing. You're not this or that or whatever. But as I'm speaking to lawyers more and more, they're like, holy crap, there is something here. And that's pretty cool to change that shift. But it's the professionals that are going to help spread the word more so than me going individually, direct targeting, person to person, because the educational time is so high.
Yeah.
I have to pick my battle.
Yeah. I was thinking, as you were speaking, I was reflecting a little bit about my own journey in becoming a podcaster and a producer and all that stuff. And it's been a pulling from a lot of relationships and working with different opportunities or projects that I've worked on, people who I've met just having, a powwow, a meeting of the minds, or they might share something they're going through and a decision they made, and right? And so I was relating a lot to, obviously different space, but I was relating a lot to how that can happen for you. And now it's interesting when somebody asks me a question about podcasting, I almost am surprised at myself that I know so many of the different answers or can think about so many different angles that might be in consideration. And I'm assuming, I kind of am feeling that it's the same for you in the sense that there's such a wealth of knowledge. You can't take your brain and put it in a book, right? You have to experience and go through it and have those relationships that also help you experience and go through it.
So I am actually trying to write a small ebook and then a larger ebook. And the annoying part becomes, what am I taking out? What am I leaving in? And I'm like, what this leads to this, to this, to this. And so that's why it's probably going to be a series, a mini ebook in terms of free, and then a larger one, and then a larger one, and a larger one. So at least people have access to what they prefer, as opposed to all or nothing or that kind of thing. So that's helpful. But the networking is key, because, again, I am under contract with New York State. So I'm both a city and a state employee. It's a very weird situation. But bottom line is, the agreement I made through the Conflicts of Interest Board when I had that 4-year battle I mentioned before.
Yeah.
So part of the deal is I don't take on cases in the city, and I try to avoid the state almost completely. And so I can't use my resources in the city or state. I don't want people even knowing about it, because then they're tempted to say, you have to help me. You know your crap. As when I walk into certain courthouses, they know it's bad news for the defending attorneys. Honestly, it's not about me. It's not about me trying to toot my own horn.
Yeah.
It's the honest truth. And when I walk in, I especially Bronx Family Court is known for being very intense and crazy and pro-parent, pro-family. Yet I managed to convince a judge while walking the line, so to speak, of certain things. And they try to get me on a question, which was, so you didn't see the whole house, you didn't see certain pieces or whatever. How is that assessing all the safety? I go, well, that is assessing all the safety, because I have to do a certain protocol. And they're like, huh. And the judge is like, well, what do you mean? And I explain it further. They go, okay, you're cool. We shouldn't use those words, of course.
Yeah, right. I doubt it.
but the point is, but the point is, and the other attorneys, the children's attorney, the parents' attorneys are like, holy crap, he just walked that line and won. And most of my colleagues won't necessarily get it right completely. But again, this is the point, is for me anyway, listening, learning, adapting, growing, constantly challenging myself, those pieces are key. And so reaching out cold, literally cold, whether it's to you, and we have a whole story on that other audio app we won't mention.
No, it's not
where
important.
you
It doesn't
first
exist.
are like, this is the honest truth. When you first heard my voice, because I was so timid at the time, I didn't know I had a voice, my own empowerment on that app, for example. You're like, I'm not sure we want you on the Owwll app. This is a true story. I don't know if you remember this or not. And I had to have Paul Vado speak to you, okay? And Paul's like, Jason's, what's going on, whatever. And so then we spoke. When I first went on the app, you're like grilling me for a half hour, and you should. Honestly, God, you should.
Because it's a part of the app, of course.
But it's not just that. You should make sure that someone like myself who doesn't fit a certain mold is legit, okay? And I know I answered all your questions way more than you expected. And towards the end, you tried to get me on a question, which was, okay, can you impact full custody or not? And I said, well, no one can. but you can affect certain other aspects. And you're like, okay, you're cool. I remember that part of the conversation. You probably do too at this point. But
it's amazing.
You know, the longer you're in business, you're around people that go through this stuff.
That's right.
And I happen to,
That's right.
you know, have someone that went through it, so I kind of knew a lot about it just from their experiences. And that's why when you came on the platform, I was like, is he real? Is he but what's cool, you know, with big states, you're publicly listed. So with a quick Google search, you can really find out. And then I knew
That's right.
right off the bat, you were the real deal. And then, you know what I see Jaime for him? I see him being a podcaster.
I do.
Right?
Yeah,
Because now that he's found his voice,
well, here's
I just look at it as like
100%.
These are stories that need to be heard. And there's
100%.
so many people going through this right now. And there's no podcasts out there that really like go into that depth.
That depth.
Right?
Yeah.
Because everyone like doesn't know where to turn. It's always call the police. But like, no. That's like when it's you know, up here. Like, no. We want to call when it's like down here.
Yeah.
Right before it gets to that level.
But even calling the police can be a mistake.
Yeah.
Because if you say the wrong thing, then they all talk.
Totally.
And they put notes in their systems. And then your label, again, that's the right words, right responses.
And also, let's be real. Everyone's a human, so you never know who's behind the badge. You never know.
And not just that, if you're going through trauma, you're not going to probably say all the right words. Because there's a disempowerment there.
Your adrenaline's rushing, of course.
Yes, and there's all the other stuff. Or maybe the abuser's listening, or they're there, or they're trying to like put pressure on you. That's why, you know, one of the biggest things child welfare shouldn't do, but they do, is interview the children in the home. Okay, and the protocol is usually not to do that. But oftentimes you hear stories where they interviewed the kids in the home, kids said everything's fine, and then they had nothing to go on. Hello? You don't interview in the house.
See, here's the thing that I want everyone to aspire to. I want them to aspire to be able to do what you do, which is someone can ask you, whether they're calling through Owwll or meeting on the street, whatever, right? They can ask you a question or present a scenario to you, and you're able to just, lack of a better word, vomit up all this great, useful information, right? That's what makes you an expert. And that can come from, you know, formal education, but what it really comes from is the doing every single day. And so that's what you've been in the thick of it. You've been doing it every single day. And so as you're watching this, one, learn how do you develop your own expertise? It's about getting into the trenches every single day and meeting those people who are there and engaging with people who are there and learning from everybody and never stopping your own expansion and your own growth.
Showing up. It's literally showing up. Even if you don't feel like it, just do one thing. If we're talking about business alone, just do one thing every day. If you want to go play on an app for the next 8 hours, you're going through COVID or whatever, is what it is.
Yeah.
But just do one thing every day. I can't tell you where I've had like these peaks and valleys and stuff in terms of emotions and stuff. And the planting of seeds 3 months ago, 5 months ago, 8 months ago is now yielding results. Where I was on a podcast last week and someone immediately called me after listening to the podcast, literally like an hour later or a half hour later after I finished our shift. They're like, you know what I'm going through.
Wonderful.
No one else does. And part of what I do is it's much more upstream. It's much more closer to that tap of the initial part as opposed to, I'm not knocking anybody, but there are many coaches where it's like how to overcome divorce and how to work through divorce, whatever. They're not further up in that journey to know how to deal with it then, because if you can deal with it then, you have less headaches and issues, a better outcome, and more control going down that stream, down that journey, and you have less headaches, less court revisits or costs or whatever. So
you just gave oh, sorry, go ahead, Jason.
But I guess one big issue, of course, is not everyone could afford you. Right then, there's only so much time have in a day. So how do you?
I hear you, but
how do you balance that? Because now that you're really getting out there on more podcasts, and you've built out your website, your social media, you're on Owwll, you have 200 reviews. Like all of a sudden, you know, as Owwll keeps expanding, right, you're going to be the first one people look at, and this is, of course, you know, a growing problem right now.
And when you're altruistic, you want to help everybody.
Yeah. So like, where do you see this going? Where, you know, it's still reasonable, because after a while, you're going to keep increasing your cost to hire you one-on-one. Yeah. And then, of course, you're going to have to hire people under you.
Yeah. So I still have reasonable cost structures. I know people are going through tough times. And for me, it's about paying my bills and hopefully a little bit more, but more importantly, giving people the tools they need. Because again, I amalgamate information, all these different small points. And then so it's both the macro, the over umbrella, and then the micro. So structure-wise, you know, I have payment plans. I make it as affordable as I possibly can, and that kind of stuff. I do occasionally take on now. My time is a bit more intense, but I do occasionally take on pro bono clients even now, on a case by case situation, depending on what's going on. Or I say, okay, I can give you 8 hours of my time, or I can give you 6 weeks, an hour a week, or whatever the structure is, just to help. Because I do believe in giving and that kind of thing. Ultimately, it's going to be a one stop shop situation. It's going to be, you'll have a hub, lawyers in the same spot, PIs in the same spot, all of it in the same spot, so you don't have to go anywhere but one location and have it.
So, what the flock?
I knew that was coming.
Yeah, what the flock in terms of, well, explain what the flock, and then I have a question.
So our third segment, What the Flock, which is all about what you've learned from mentors and how you're going to pay it forward in the future, giving advice.
So as you're building this, and Jason alluded to, you're going to build it up. There's only so much will to go around. So you're going to have people that you're bringing in under you. So if somebody's watching that says, wow, I would love to make that impact. I would love to do what Will does and possibly even work for him. What would you say would be a good course of action for that person who wants to do what you do and become an expert like you to take?
First off, if they have the gumption, reach out to me. I have no problem training someone. Obviously, there'll be certain caveats and everything else because the amalgamation is so intense. But again, I'm actually looking right now, believe it or not, to find at least one other person who I can train and have them do at least some of the preliminary or more of the mainstream kind of stuff, and have myself do more of the more intense, more unique, intense scenarios or those kinds of things. And that'll help me not just grow me, but grow in terms of helping others. So in terms of mentorship and stuff, right? Because mentors are very important. And I'm a big Tony Robbins fan. Okay, some people love him, hate him, whatever, different story, but I'm a big Tony Robbins fan. And Tony Robbins, among others, they say to find someone who does what you do, problem there, but who does what you do for me, and follow them. And I'm like, well, who the hell do I follow? And I've said this.
I thought that
don't
too
worry,
8 years ago.
I'm building a mobile platform, and there's nobody. They're like, what are you?
I don't know any other podcast producers 8 years ago. What's a podcast?
Yeah, you too. And I'm like, how do I talk to those? That's really gone my direction as well.
Off of this platform on Owwll, whatever, we all speak regularly.
Yeah.
And I think it's for that reason. It is that I believe, as I'm learning and growing more and more, I believe in like a bodily energy and that kind of thing. And the science is actually proving this more and more. And I'm getting to a point in a second, I promise you. And so whether it's, the scientific studies where people pray for somebody else and they don't know they're being prayed for, and they're healed better, a faster healing, better outcome, whatever, or in terms of energy, you attract whatever you're giving off, whatever. So I think in that respect, this was destined to happen on some level, whether it's in the podcast here or whether it's at least talking on Owwll, talking on other apps or whatever. It was us to meet because we are in our own unique spaces in a very unique way. And so mentorship is very important. So I literally have like 10 IG mentors in one field, 10 in the other, 10 here, 10 there. I literally have a list, honestly, I can't remember all of it. So I have a list of 10 people in each category. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to these people, and I rotate around and whatever, because no one amalgamates. No one is in that space. And so I'm hoping this inspires someone. If you see something uniquely different, just the whole point of being an entrepreneur is giving value to the quote unquote marketplace or to society, let's say. And so another point I was getting at before, which is you're supposed to use numbers, dollar amounts or whatever as metrics. Okay. In my case, I'm using people as my metric. I want to hit X number of people to help, as opposed to I want to get X amount of dollars, whatever it is. And those who I've worked with one-on-one occasionally as mentors drives them crazy. They're like, how are you going to do forecasts and how are you going to do whatever? And I'm like, that's nice. But I'm in a unique situation where it's people first, it's souls, it's literally saving lives. And I have, through the Owwll app that I was getting at before, and there's knowing the scenario, and I gave this person information, I know the information I gave this person, I'm being generic on purpose, is going to help save that other person's life that that person was calling on behalf of. Because they're in a situation and it's affecting, I believe, their health and that kind of stuff, whatever. Yeah. And for me, yes, I have to pay my bills, I have to feed myself and whoever I'm responsible for and that kind of stuff. But ultimately, it's about really helping people, and that's why I created the company and why I reach out more so to the southern part of the U.S. because the numbers are higher in the South. I don't know why, but it's true. Whether it's divorce and especially high conflict stuff, narcissism, quote unquote.
Alcohol.
There's a whole, I mean, there's a whole,
Lots of
it
reasons
goes
to
on
go
and on.
into.
Drugs, alcohol,
Racial
whatever. But
tension.
Yeah, well, there's a whole bunch of stuff, obviously. And so just making cold calls, having that cojones, so to speak, to make cold calls and outreach to finish the other parts, the other questions, so I answer it properly and fully, to give as much value as I can to everybody here. Okay? And it's then following up. Don't just make the connection, say, okay, they're a number on my whatever platform, and then toodaloo. No, no, or whatever you want to
love
say.
it.
Okay? It just came to me. I don't know why. But yeah, but the point is, it's so important to follow up. And I do this. I rotate around. Even close friends. My training supervisor, who then became managerial above me, who I reported to, and all that stuff. I still speak to her. Was it 15 or whatever years later? Yeah, 15 years later. And she's about to retire and whatever, and she's great. One of the best I've ever worked for. And, to the point where, I was asked to help train and whatever, for a while. And the bottom line is the relationships, you must have that. Let me reverse. Don't think of it as a long-term thing where you have this mountain that's too high. I have to do this and this and this. Don't do it that way. Make small little lists. If you have to do 3 things each thing, then 3 things each thing. And knock it down. Feel good about those 3 wins. Okay, now what 3 more wins can I do now? What's the next 3 wins? The next 3 wins, and make it so easy, digestible that you can keep doing that. And it's the same thing with networking. It's the same thing with everything else. I'm now finally getting into the networks I've tried to get into, and that's about laying those seeds. Networks in terms of a dad who was with a narcissist and runs a whole program in Denver. I was on his podcast last week, and again, that one person heard me, calls me, as again, I'm more advanced in some of the stuff that this person doesn't have, and that's fine. And we're now possibly talking about a possible joint venture or some joint programs and stuff. So it really is about going step by step. And if you're just starting out and you want to talk to Amy Porterfield, I know this for a fact. There are people who've gone. Social apps are social for a reason. If you're legit and genuine and you every day or every other day in a non-stalking way, in a chill out way, message or comment or whatever, slowly but surely build up your presence to that one person, even if they're on that mountaintop, like a Grant Cardone or whoever. If you slowly get there, people reach out.
I like
other apps.
I like how you said taking 3 things, going after those 3 things, accomplishing those 3 things, and then celebrating those 3 things.
Yes.
And here's why I love that so much. I'm going to start from the back. People don't celebrate what we've accomplished anywhere near enough. And unless you reward yourself, whether it's with a pat on your back or like me this year, January 1st, I finally got myself a new car because I was tired of driving in South Florida, the car that didn't have air conditioning. So I rewarded myself after years of hard work. And if we don't, trust me, that was an outlier. Usually it's just a little pat on the back, but we all need to celebrate our own wins. And then I also love that you talk about it 3 things at a time. And here's why. So a few years ago, I'm always at a place of overwhelm, but I was in a particular place of overwhelm. And I was speaking to someone who is my co-host, Glenn, I mentioned earlier, but he's also been like a mentor to me as well. And I was overwhelmed when I was talking to him about it. And he said to me, he's like, you know what? His wife's name is Jen. He says, Jen says this piece of advice to me all the time. She says, just do one thing. And I have remembered that ever since. And every time I feel overwhelmed, I just tell myself, do one thing. Because if you are trying to accomplish the mountaintop, it can be overwhelming. And so if you're watching this saying, I want to reach this level, I want to interview or talk to Amy Porterfield, right? I want to reach that level. What are the in-between little steps that you can take and take one thing at a time? Or if you're feeling overwhelmed, one thing at a time, and it'll reduce that overwhelm and you'll be able to move forward. So I appreciated that for a lot of reasons.
And I agree, because so often we're chasing like the big numbers.
Yeah.
A big public speaking engagement. I want millions of followers. And lots of times it's just, why don't you just call somebody on Owl and make
You built up Owl one at a time.
One connection at a time.
Yes.
And, when I look back at the Shrimp Tank days, right, it was just one business owner at a time coming to the studio once a week, to create one genuine relationship.
Yeah.
And everyone would always tell me, Jason, why aren't you going to that networking event? Why aren't you going there? I go, because I network with one person a week.
Mm-hmm.
And that's more impactful than trying to go to
and then you create your own events.
and then just go around like handing out cards, doing this, and then you go back and you haven't had any real relationships that were being built. Yeah. But when you do a podcast one-on-one with that business owner with the shrimp tank, just genuine connections were made, and then reaching back out afterwards, say, do you want to grab lunch? And think about it, that's what I did with you.
Yes,
I grabbed lunch with you at our good place, Kapow, down the block.
Yes.
Right? And we got to know one another. And then because that connection.
And I've hated you ever since.
And now look at you. Now look at you here.
But Will, same thing. Yeah.
But everyone just wants to just get it for free. They want to just go to an event and everyone just do business with them, right? You know, before they take those first steps. And that's what Will's saying.
You got to get people to know, and trust you.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You didn't offer me lunch. I feel insulted.
I mean, there's still time.
hey, it's 11 in the morning, Will. What are you doing at 1 o'clock?
I'm just kidding. But, no, but yeah. And there's so much to say right now in my head. But bottom line is, we always look at people when they're established. We don't look at people. It's the iceberg, metaphor, right?
Yeah.
You look at the top, that top part of the iceberg, and you don't see the 90% that's below. What's going on? For example, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's something on the lines of, it took, I think it's Bob Proctor and Dale Nightingale, those guys, right, from the early days, 300 speaking engagements before they were paid for their first one afterwards.
Wow.
And no one sees that.
No one sees that.
Because every time I see people, trying to do speaking engagement, like, well, I'm not going to do that one for free. I got to charge. I'm like, yeah, you've done like 7 speaking engagements. I'm like, they don't see those numbers.
You know what? This reminds me of one of my favorite lines from an old movie, A League of Their Own, and they're talking to this woman baseball player about, she got on the team. She's like, well, imagine my surprise. There I was in the farmhouse, just turning better, and all of a sudden, the phone rings. Like, it's like everyone thinks that there's this overnight success, and that's not how it happens. You're doing the work that nobody sees. You're the 90% iceberg. You're the duck legs kicking under the water or whatever.
What's worse is those who, let's say, win the lottery. Most of them blow it because they don't have the mindset and the energy, the internal energy. I don't mean like energy like how much can you bench press or how much can you run or whatever. I'm talking about an energy in terms of your personality, your soul, all of that aspect. And if you don't have things, if you don't have things in the right perspective, you're going to have what some call a liabilities perspective as opposed to an assets perspective.
Yeah.
And if you have an assets perspective, you make that money work and grow. And that's what Owwll can help with, or personal LLCs or whatever the cases can help with, and done the right way, having the right people to guide you. There are many people who say they can guide and don't always work out 100% or whatever, and others are good. Like, for example, there's one person who I'm using now, and he's brilliant. His name is Devin Rodriguez. I do want to give him a shout out because he's brilliant. And for me, he's the right fit. I'll admit I respond better to more of a very structured Army government kind of mentality, but I was trained for 15 years. You have to go what you know, so to speak. And so he's now putting fire under my rump, so to speak, and it's working. It's pushing me. It's getting me those results.
He's kind of like a mentor for you right now. Look at that.
Yes. Even though he's more in terms of, and I went to him because part of being through trauma means that you're going to close yourself off and shut down a little bit. And so I wasn't always able to be as emotional. I don't mean emotional like crazy emotional. I mean emotional in the sense of having complete happiness or having complete whatever the emotion is, controlled, not like, inappropriate or whatever. And to be able to, he's a master storyteller. He learned from, I think it was either Bob Proctor or somebody, I forget who it was exactly, who he learned from. The name escapes me. But he learned directly from that person, put in time, 10 years and so on and so forth, or 5 or 10 years, whatever it is. And so for me, I focus on one aspect that I can grow from. And that's my biggest thing, is to be able to show people that I'm not the person who's been through trauma. I'm the person that can help them. And it's the emotions that connect with people the most. Otherwise, I'm withdrawn. I'm not connecting. I'm not showing people that they can trust me. Even if I know what I'm talking about, I can still be factual, intellectual, whatever. But they're like, but something's missing. I don't feel it. And we make decisions off of feelings.
Yeah.
Whether it's a perpetrator they feel a certain way. I'm not justifying it, but they feel a certain way. They're programmed in a certain way, whatever. There's a behavior. The quantum, so to speak, is thoughts, emotions, behaviors. Sorry, yes.
Well, this is going to lead into our final segment over here. Because,
well, we're already in our final segment. We've been in it.
The final the closing act, the grand finale over here. But that actually, goes back to the Owwll platform. So I do want to spend a minute because you are the most active person on the platform. You have the most reviews pretty much besides for myself and like maybe one or two others. But I do want to touch on the subject because it kind of is talking about, people trusting you. And you said it earlier, like you came on the platform. And at first I was like, wait, should I trust this person? I didn't know you from a hole in the wall, and we all do that, right? But the beauty of Owwll is it adds all your social media connections, but it has the reviews in there. So why don't you speak to that, part? Because now when people call you on Owwll, they obviously trust you. And it's important because when we see on all these other social platforms, like the Clubhouses of the world, is like, it's just tracking likes, right? And follows. And you could just say something cool and people follow you, but really that knowledge, isn't really being tracked, and Owwll is. So I think it's very important you touch on the subject, as more and more people, join the platform, of course.
Yeah, I would give one example where for Clubhouse, the numbers aren't the issue. It's if you have numbers and people ask you to be on their stages as an expert. So Owwll is that stage. Owwll is that evolution in that sense of you're invited to the show, so to speak, and you're now sort of the lead of that show. Can you produce? Can you whatever? And so it's very important for me not just to show up, but really show up.
Yeah.
And I don't mean like blast everybody with everything. It's obviously the right perspectives and everything matches and whatever, but it's really, really important to, provide that value and
especially because they're paying for the call.
But even if the call was $1 and someone doesn't value $1, as an example, okay, it's more about who you are as a person and who you are in terms of your standards. And can you help? And there's a number of people on the platform who have the same amount as roughly the same amount of followers and stuff as myself and everything else, and they provide value in their own niches and stuff, and that's beautiful. And that's the point, is being able to give all that information in one spot, and to be the timer aspect is genius, by the way, because it really forces people to be purposeful and direct and outcome driven, and that's important also in business from before is outcome driven, reverse engineer everything you do, and you get things done quicker. Same thing with that clock. It makes you get to the point right away. And people are like, so let me ask you questions about the end point. And they understand the end point. They can go backwards as much as they can until the clock runs out, so to speak. And they know a lot more because it's clearer and it's more concise. But it also forces an expert to make sure that I'm clear.
Get rid of the fluff.
I'm not winded.
That
I'm making sure that everything is economical, understandable, not high English, but English people can understand, because I can go either way. I've been told this occasionally. And so it's really important to make sure everything is there. And so I do use, especially because of what I do, people don't want to leave me reviews or testimonials, even one-on-one stuff. But the app forces someone to leave something. And so I literally tell people, this is the link, go check out this app. You have 170, 80, 200, whatever the number is. But it's more than 4 or 5. It's more than 10 or 20. It's a lot of people who've spoken to me who themselves have their own clout, their own legitimacy. And so that is a far more effective thing. We talk about targeted engagement, whether it's podcasters targeting other podcasts to get your followership up, or, for you here or with Owwll one-on-one, it's the same thing. Your targeted engagement is someone who calls you. How you show up and then build from there, because they will call you again.
You know what? I'm going to call you because honestly, I'm going through a similar situation, not as harsh as I'm sure you've seen way worse, but it's resonating, and I feel like, oh my gosh, there's somebody literally in the palm of my hand who can help me know what I don't know. And so I'm going to be giving you a call, and I'm so grateful that we've had a chance to connect, obviously through Owwll, and then we're connecting. I'm learning more about you, and because of that, I'm going to reach out to you, have a conversation with you, which is going to help me grow. And so I think that's the basis of everything that Owwll is about, what this show is about, and as you, a viewer or listener, what we want you to inspire you to do. So if people want to get in touch with you and learn more about you and grow further with you, how do they do so? Obviously on the Owwll app, but otherwise, how would they do so? Yeah, obviously. Otherwise, how would they do so?
And as Jason knows with the stats, I'm on the app a lot because I want to make myself available.
I mean, he really is. Go on there and just follow him.
Does not sleep.
Just follow him.
1 o'clock in the morning.
You can
3
talk
o'clock
to
in the
him
morning. I'm like
15 times a
still
day.
on.
Because I'm trained to go 3 hours, three days without sleep. That's a whole other story. But
There you go. Yeah.
You weren't wrong. It's legit. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the point is, I'm actually just created two Facebook groups, one for men, one for women.
All right.
To really give proper value and to again change the dynamic of what's out there to shift everything to give way more.
What are those Facebook pages called?
One is take control of either one is they're both along the lines of take control of your divorce before he does or she does, that kind of stuff.
Okay, and we'll definitely find them. And when we get this as in the podcast, we'll definitely put the link in the show notes.
And so the Facebook groups are the easiest way to get a hold of me in that one-on-one kind of sense. It's still small in numbers, so I'm the one running both of those Facebook groups. I do weekly groups on Clubhouse, one for men on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Another one on Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific. That women's group is called Quilting Power. And it's meant to shift dynamic in terms of how people get support when it comes to all current types of trauma, not just what I specialize in. And the men's group is Many Ascend. That's another one where you can find me. But there's also the website, which is the easiest way to find me. If you go to controlandpowerstrategy.com, A-N-D, because my accent's a little funky sometimes. So controlandpowerstrategy.com. And you can just do a booking. It's free. The consultation is free. There's no price to the consultation. And then we go from there. If I can't help you, which is rare, but if I can't, I'll say, try this person or whatever. And that's the other thing is having that robust network means that I'm not stonewalling someone by not giving them the proper help.
That's true.
So that's the bottom line is, reach out. I may be able to help you and it's not my area of expertise, but I can say, go talk to so-and-so, and they'll be able to help you. It's happened a few times, actually, even on the Owwll.
And that's the beauty of a network, right? You have so many people you're connected to on all these platforms, not just Owwll, right? Owwll is just a place where it makes sense, right? We're not bashing other brands. It's just like we all could be there and there for the right reasons. So if you're listening, go ahead, check out Will on any of these platforms he just mentioned. We'll be back next week to another Owwll podcast. This was episode 4. This has been awesome. Will, you won the record. You were the longest podcast so far. We'll see how long that lasts in the coming months, of course.
Challenge for all of our future guests.
Well, everyone listening, we'll be back next week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. See ya.